Daniel Ortiz in Angelo, Texas. We had 4 large financial unexpected emergencies, and I knew that I needed something to give us a little more breathing room. And when he mentioned we can skip 2 house payments and wipe out credit card debt and loan debt, so that's exactly what I did. I called them, and it did change everything. Diane, she was awesome. She was professional, and the important thing with her is she listened. That's what made all the difference in the world. She was patient, and anytime that I needed to talk to her, she was there. She texted back. It was a different experience from any other place. Well, I can tell you the difference that it made was over $80,000 for us. It freed up that much. My credit score went up 126 points with Save with Conrad, which made it an 802. My name is Daniel Ortiz, and I freed up $80,000 with SaveWithConrad.com.
NMLS number 65084, equal housing lender. Woo!
Welcome to Something to Wrestle with Bruce Prichard. Bruce Prichard. Well, you know.
That's not a rib.
She pooted.
What a rib?
No, yeah, amigo.
There's no box of gimmicks.
Rumor and innuendo.
I don't deal in rumor and innuendo. And was he there? I was there. I don't give a shit. I ain't scared.
I ain't scared of shit.
Fuck him.
Fuck you, Bruce.
I love you.
Give me double cheeseburger, double cheese, double mayo, double onion, motherfucker.
Bruce Prichard. March 22nd. It's announced that the WWF had purchased WCW. That happens on the Torch website, and the Torch is who I used for all of my research this week. Shout out to my good friend, the Greensboro Jackoff himself, Mr. Bruce Mitchell. PWTorch.com is where you can see more great content like the stuff I'm going over today. The Wall Street Journal covered it the very next day on the 23rd. And supposedly the executives and attorneys worked until the wee hours of that night on Thursday morning to get a short form agreement in place. And the speculation at the time that was reported was that it was somewhere between $10 to $15 million. But in recent years, we've heard those numbers fluctuate, depending on who you ask, from $2 to $4 million. So before we talk about money, and you tell me we're not talking about money, tell me when you first knew for sure, hey, we're really a player in this thing, because it came out in January that you guys had made offers. But tell me about that, you know, what you heard back then, maybe in November, December, January, and then when you knew in March, oh shit, this is a real thing.
Well, I found out it was a real thing probably that Tuesday or Wednesday before it happened.
What did you hear in late 2000, early January about Vince possibly making a bid?
I don't remember hearing anything serious at that time other than there were feelers put out there, but there were ridiculous numbers that were reported at that time.
50 to 80 million.
And yeah, he was not interested in that at all.
Sure. I mean, there's no sense in it.
No. The interest, just so it's clear, what we were interested in was if there was a possibility that it could remain on TNT, the time slot was interesting. Being on another network was interesting, and being able to take the brand and expand it on an already established time slot and already established network. So that was attractive at that time. When we found out that was not really going to be a possibility, it changed to the library.
So when did you know, hey, this is really going to happen? You said the Tuesday before.
Well, really, we didn't till it was done on that Wednesday night. And as you said, it did go into the wee hours, and that was Stu Snyder, who was the WWF CEO at the time. And Stu had previously worked for TBS. He worked for Cartoon Network.
Oh, wow, okay.
And Stu was the CEO, great guy. And during all this negotiation back and forth, the guys at TBS had reached out to Stu, because here we are, the largest wrestling company in the world. whether or not we were interested. Would we like to buy it?
Right.
And also looking to Stu for some advice on what they should do. And the offer came up, and then here we were.
That's kind of interesting. And I take it that they contacted him because if you're trying to unload this thing, who the fuck else even knows what to do with it?
Correct.
I mean, it's really a unique deal. So when do you first you hear about it, and what does that sound like? What's Vince say?
Goddamn, pal. Well, okay, but let me rewind this too a little bit, just so you understand where we come from. When Vince bought a casino in Vegas, I'm sitting at home and get a phone call. Hey, pal, we bought a casino. What the hell? No one knew. No one even knew Vince was in Vegas. And he went out and bought the damn Debbie Reynolds casino. So there were, a lot of things, at times that
weren't discussed. It just happens.
Weren't discussed and just happened. And you're sitting there going, did you know that? And everybody's going, did you know that? Did you know that? And he would go off on a whim at times. Obviously, in his mind, he knew what he wanted to do and had a vision. And he did it. And that's the way that Vince operates. So to hear early on, well, yeah, we'll throw out a bid at WCW. You hear those things all the time. When I heard we're going to buy the restaurant there in Times Square, and we're going to have a WWF-themed restaurant. Goddamn, pal, it's going to be the WWF restaurant. It'll be bigger than Planet Hollywood, bigger than Hard Rock. And like, okay, great. Next thing you know, you're doing a grand opening in Times Square, the most expensive property in Manhattan. And so you're shocked constantly, but then you learn how not to be shocked. So it was just kind of another day at the office. Okay, we're going to buy WCW.
How does he tell you? Or, I mean, here's my question. In my head, he goes to a couple of confidants and says, hey, what do you think about this?
He asked what we thought about purchasing, possibly purchasing the brand.
Who is we?
We, I was a part of it. Stephanie, obviously, Shane, Kevin Dunn, Brian Gewirtz, I believe Michael Hayes was there. I don't know for sure. I don't remember. Paul Heyman was there. And
Wait. This is March, and
yes.
Heyman's there.
Yes, Heyman was
and
there.
he's involved in this meeting.
He was involved in it.
Now, the
Vince
reason
wanted to pick his brain and see what he thought.
The reason that's shocking to me, he had just debuted as an announcer on Monday Night Raw. ECW had not yet even ceased operations and filed bankruptcy. That wouldn't happen until April. And he was in the meeting.
He was a part of the creative team at that time.
When Vince said, so he can, wait a minute. He walks in a creative meeting and says, what do y'all think about WCW?
Well, he pulled a few of us out and asked us, yeah.
And am I to guess that this is in the big conference room on the top floor?
No, this was actually at the television studio in the conference room there.
Okay. And so you guys are around a big table, and Vince is at the head, and he goes around the room and says, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think?
Pretty much.
So carry me through. What does Shane and Stephanie think?
They were for it and thought it would be a good idea. Again, it all depended upon what the conditions were, what the price was,
sure,
what we got for the price. And
at that point, you don't really know.
We had no clue.
Yeah,
we didn't have any clue other than the library was attractive.
Right.
The lure of having
the name, the brand, the logo.
Name, the brand. It was like, okay, they've kicked our ass before. Maybe we can reposition the brand and build it to be viable again. So
you guys all have those type of discussions. Maybe we could make a show.
Sure.
Okay. So it's just a free form roundtable. What if?
Yeah, and I'm sure Vince has in his head what he wants to do.
But he just wants to hear.
He wants. Yeah, he's the kind. He'll take an idea from anybody. Carlos the janitor, doesn't matter.
What about Pat Patterson? What did he think?
Pat wasn't there.
Okay. What did Heyman think?
Well, sir, WCW is a dead brand. It's dead.
And, he just, I don't know. He just kind of...
So he shit on the idea everybody else is pro
Paul did kind of, yeah. Paul buried it, and
Why?
I think in Paul's burial, I think that, and this is Bruce saying, this is not what Paul said, nor have I had any conversation with Paul. My interpretation of Paul's burial was that I think Paul felt that Vince should have done that with ECW. WCW is a dead brand, but ECW was a dead brand.
Do what with ECW? Invest millions of dollars.
Whatever money he was going to pay for WCW, take that same money, give it to keeping ECW alive. And that's my interpretation. That's my conjecture of what I kind of think that the underlying
I'm a huge ECW mark, as you know, but the number of eyeballs that saw and recognized WCW compared to ECW is two totally different animals.
True, but you had the owner of ECW sitting at the table.
Sure.
And Paul...
So Vince hears this and just knows to take it with a grain of salt.
But again, he wanted to listen. He was interested in Paul's opinion.
The most popular idea, though, kind of the common idea at the table is, let's give WCW a show and create our own competition with it. Try to redo something.
Yes.
So then the show, or the deal is made in the wee hours of the night. Is this something that we would have, there's the famous McDivitt. Would he have been involved in this, or is this not the group of attorneys that Vince would lean on for that?
No, this was more the in-house attorneys. Jerry might have been involved in it. I don't know. But it was mainly Stu and I believe Frank Serpe. I know Frank Serpe was involved in it. Frank Serpe was the head of the finance. I think he was the head at that time. Might have been Augie, might have been Frank. But I know Frank was involved in the transition.
Was there any gamesmanship to hiring a guy who used to work for Turner to be your CEO for WWF?
Stu?
Yeah.
He worked for Cartoon Network. I mean, it wasn't like he was in WCW or anything like that, but he was a bright guy. But
he's familiar with the inner workings of Turner Broadcasting.
Yeah, but that didn't matter at that point.
Well, I just didn't know.
He was
because he's not a wrestling guy.
No, he had a hell of a resume
for television.
A hell of a resume, yes, without a doubt.
I'm going to ask because real time. The number that comes out at the time is 10 to 15 million, depending on who you ask. More recently, it's 2 to 4 million. Just, nod up or down.
It sure as hell wasn't 10 to 15. How you like that? See, I just talk numbers with you.
Was it less than 4?
Yeah.
Okay. Was it more than 2?
Not telling you.
Okay. So it's less than 4.
It wasn't nearly as much as everybody thought.
When you hear the number, who do you hear it from?
Well, we didn't hear a number. You know what? I did not hear a number till after the fact, and was shocked. I was shocked because you'd been hearing all these huge numbers. You've been hearing about what Fusion, like I said, the $60 million, $80 million.
That's what I'm saying.
And you're thinking, oh my God, how much did we pay for this thing?
Right.
And then when you hear what the actual number was, and you go, wow, okay, cool, roll tide. I didn't say roll tide. That would be a misquote. But that's what I would have said had I known you at that time. And
did you partly think, well, goddamn, pal, for that I would have bought it?
Sure.
I mean, that would not have been difficult to pull that kind of money together for a deal like that, I don't think.
No, not at all.
I mean, that's crazy. I mean, especially when you look at how much money went into the development of the network that we enjoy now for only $9.99 a month. This is a bargain.
Sure.
When do you know what all you're getting?
We didn't. And we knew that we were getting the library, but the due diligence hadn't taken place. We hadn't had discovery. We didn't really know what was there.
Let's run through it just, like a third grader. They rent office space.
Hang on. I'm sorry. I'm going to answer your question a little bit differently. We knew that we were not going to assume any of their debt, and we knew that we were not going to assume any talent contracts. That whatever we did with talent, we would redo under the WWF name. We would not, because we had no idea what they were.
So instead of buying the company, what you really bought were physical assets.
Correct.
The logo.
Right.
And the library.
Right. We brought a bunch of different
But when you buy
IPs
when you buy
like
the
that.
company, though, you inherit the debt. And so to just, kind of
he
do
piecemealed
a
it, yeah.
fire sale here.
Correct.
So let's run through this. Turner owns all the real estate. So WCW doesn't own any land or buildings. But they did own, silly shit like rings.
Well, that's not silly for a wrestling company to own wrestling rings.
No, but when you're talking about, millions of dollars.
Yeah, they own wrestling rings. I mean, we got the rings. We got
Belts
some old,
and, entrance sets and.
I don't think we really even took much of their sets. We did take their trainer boxes that they had, like the big crates that you see on concerts and things. They roll around backstage. They had some nice trainer setups.
Well, where do the rings go?
To the warehouse, and some of them went to talent. I believe Rock got one in Florida. I think Taker got one in Texas. I think Booker T ended up with one.
I'm fascinated.
But Booker T ended up with his, I think, from Mark to Booker.
From the Undertaker?
Yes.
Okay. I'm fascinated by a WWF talent like the Undertaker getting a WCW ring. I don't know why. I mean, I get this is a dumb Mark question, but outside of like taking bumps or something, what can he really do with that? The ropes are different. It's a different size. As a wrestling fan, I get this is a dumbass question. I've always been told WCW rings were smaller, WWF rings were bigger, and that the ropes were totally different. They're cable. So it's not like you could do flippy shit off of it and it translate to the exact way it would be in a WWF ring. And it seems like your timing would be off if the ring was bigger.
Yeah,
smaller.
that's true. And all of that is true. But it was a place to take bumps. And if you're going to be recuperating from an injury, you could go in and wrestle around, take bumps, things like that. Not ideal. Like Undertaker, for example, ended up with the WWE ring. So, like I said, I think Booker ended up getting some of those rings eventually. But it was there. We figured we might be able to use them. And we did use some of them for spot shows where we needed smaller rings, things of that nature.
Wow.
Use them for developmental, some of the places that had smaller venues.
But I just mean in terms of a lot of, like if you bought a construction company, you're getting a bunch of machinery, you're getting heavy equipment, you're getting
We got
stuff.
rings.
You got rings.
We got rings.
Anything else you can remember you guys buying and getting possession of that you remember thinking, this is kind of cool or this is kind of silly?
No, not that I can really remember.
Do you, you've always been a title belt guy, like our great sponsor, Leather by Dan. Do you remember any of the belts you guys got and remember thinking, this is kind of cool that we have this?
No.
Okay.
Honestly, no, they were.
That's the only thing I remember being on TV that was really WCW.
Aside from the big gold belt, there weren't really any cool belts.
Yeah.
And
it's neat to see Shawn Michaels with that belt and The Rock with that belt. I mean, that's kind of fun.
Without a doubt, that part's cool, but it was the rest of them were just belts. They're just props.
Yeah.
All right, folks, we are here in the catacombs, the bowels, if you will, of the Joe Louis Arena in Detroit, Michigan, where The Undertaker has just defeated Hulkamania. And you, Mr. Bear, you have declared that Hulkamania, as we know it, is now dead. Oh, yes, Mean Gene. Oh, yes, Hulkster will not pose anymore. He has gone on to another life. But the services are not finished. They will end right here tonight in Texas. Oh, yes, where my Undertaker will deliver last rites. Oh, yes, you big yellow, tan, and red motherfucker, you.
Oh, man. That's so good. It's fun that we're watching this too, because we just recently, most of us at least, had a chance to catch Steve Austin talking to the Undertaker here on the network. And they talk so much about the early days of the Undertaker. And this is really shitting and getting. As a reminder, The Undertaker beat Hulk Hogan for the world title. I'll take a look at this. Look into the coffin, Mr. Okerlund. It's phenomenal. What a great shot. Very well done here. They're talking about, Hulkamania being in this coffin from Survivor Series. Of course, we've covered Survivor Series 1990 in our archives. Be sure to check that out at somethingtowrestle.com. But 1 year later, 1 year after the debut of the character, he beats Hulk Hogan for the world title, which is really only an honor that had been bestowed to one other man, the Ultimate Warrior, back at WrestleMania 6 in 1990. So, you roll through those championship years, 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89. And the first major loss that Hogan suffers for the title, besides the whole dispute with the double referee thing on NBC, is a pinfall loss to the Ultimate Warrior. And now again here in 1991 with the Undertaker. And man, look at this. What a great treat. I feel bad that we're talking over Gorilla Monsoon and Bobby the Brain. This is my favorite duo of WWF commentators in history.
I think it's a lot of people's favorite duo. You go back, and for old time fans, it was either Jesse and Vince or Bobby and Gorilla.
I mean, I really enjoyed Gorilla and Jesse as well, but there's something about Bobby Heenan that, especially, I think there is a whole group of guys who are like my age, and we've just sort of grown into appreciating the greatness of Bobby Heenan, that maybe we didn't pick up on as a kid because we were just cheering for our favorites. But as an adult, man, you can't help but look at what this guy was doing and think nobody was at his level.
No, Bobby was, I think, amongst his peers as well. Longtime fans, they have always looked at Bobby Heenan as being the greatest manager of all time. And no one living today, in my opinion, would dispute that from a working standpoint and just being able to get talent over his own as a heel. He was able to get baby faces over in a big way by putting them over and knocking them at the same time, knocking them in a negative, positive way. That it was an art form for someone that truly got it. Bobby was a master of that.
By the way, once upon a time, another famous, very tall wrestler would say that he made dragging the belt to the ring famous long before Steve Austin. I think the Undertaker has something to say about that, because here he comes dragging the belt to the ring. And we've talked about, how you got him into the company and your whole idea and just the development of this character. And 1 year later, here he is. This is a guy who talked about on Steve Austin's podcast on the WWE Network, the Broken Skull Sessions, which I highly recommend. It should have been called Dead Man Talking, but whatever. That he wasn't sure what they were going to do with this character and wasn't sure how he was going to be, what his character was going to be. He had been Mean Mark Callis for the NWA and WCW, and Ole Anderson famously told him, nobody will ever buy a ticket to see you wrestle. And now here he is as the Undertaker, and he has the top belt in the entire industry worldwide without question in December of 1991, and has the distinction of being one of two guys to beat Hulk Hogan for the belt. The other being the Ultimate Warrior, who's no longer here. Of course, he was sent home after SummerSlam 91. You see the fans going wild here. But this match is not without controversy. Of course, at SummerSlam, or Survivor Series rather, when Hulk Hogan is up in the tombstone position, the Undertaker's ready to pile drive him, drop him on his own head, as they say. Ric Flair sneaks in, slides a folding chair underneath, and it makes that pile driver even more devastating. Not just a regular tombstone, but a tombstone on a chair. And I can't believe this is real, but Dave Meltzer actually wrote about this in The Observer and said, Flair then put a chair in the ring, and Undertaker gave Hogan a tombstone pile driver on the chair for the pin. When watching the show, I thought the best work of the entire show was Hogan selling the tombstone after the match was over. It took him several minutes to get to his feet, and he looked really groggy, and his selling was completely realistic. As it turns out, he was really injured, apparently by the tombstone on the chair. After viewing it back several times, it does appear that Hogan's head never came near the chair. However, Undertaker may have jammed Hogan's neck with his knee, since Hogan was hospitalized legit all night long with a jammed neck. Yeah. I think, and I could be wrong, but I believe the rumor and innuendo is that the Undertaker, being a relatively young guy in the business and really excited and proud to have this opportunity, just 1 year in the company after being told a year prior you'd never sell a ticket in the business, he flew his whole family to Survivor Series to see this big pay-per-view, to see this big match against Hulk Hogan, because he knew the creative, oh my God, I'm beating Hulk Hogan on pay-per-view for the World Wrestling Federation title. And there's a little bit of a stink on the title win, because afterwards Hogan legitimately, allegedly feigns an injury and goes to the hospital. And when you watch the replay back, to Meltzer's point, he's nowhere near the chair. But Hogan that night convinced everyone, no, he's legitimately hurt, and went to the hospital. And it sort of put a stink on the title win of the big proud moment for the real life Mark Calloway. And I don't know that Hogan and Undertaker ever really saw eye to eye ever again, according to the rumor and innuendo. You weren't there, but you were around both of these guys for a long time. Tell me what you heard about Survivor Series 91 and what you remember about this match in particular, with maybe that being the underlying heat between the two.
I heard all that, and I watched it back several times, and it looked like that Taker probably could have gotten run over by a Mack truck, and he had such a tight hold of Hogan that there was nothing that was going to happen to Hulk. Is what it is, and
it couldn't have looked safer, is the point. And when you go back
to me,
yeah,
and to Taker, and I think that knowing Taker, he would never, ever intentionally hurt anybody. And certainly he was going to be extra careful that night with Hulk Hogan.
Golden Goose.
You know, it looked good to me.
By the way, look at the tremendous work of the Undertaker here, doing the choke and rolling his eyes back into his head. If you haven't yet, I can't believe I'm advocating this, because I wanted so desperately at Starrcast to have you drag these stories out of the Undertaker. It wasn't to be, but the Broken Skull session, which I can't put over enough. When you're done with this, go watch that on the W Network. It's phenomenal. Undertaker talked about how when he became this Undertaker character, he had to sort of change the way he thought about wrestling. What he could do and what he should do became two different things. Yes, he can run the ropes real fast and jump real high for clotheslines, but would the Undertaker do that? And you really saw the Undertaker as a character and Mark Calloway as a performer doing the Undertaker come into his own in this first year, because you see how slow and methodical and almost Michael Myers and Jason, you know, the real horror movie film franchises, you see how slow he's working. You go back and watch him as Mean Mark Callis, totally different presentation. He's clicking on all cylinders here, is he not?
Absolutely. And that just goes to the talent of Mark and just how good he really was, that he was able to adapt. And we took all of the things that he did extraordinarily well, and we would incorporate them into the match at the right point.
Suddenly. So he would work very methodically and slow, but when it was time, just like in a movie, he's on you.
Exactly. And he would turn it up and you'd go, holy fuck, where did that come from? That's what made him so dangerous, and that's what made him so appealing to the audience.
This is such a phenomenal, pay-per-view to me, because I was at maybe the peak of my fandom here from a WWF standpoint, because I couldn't believe somebody finally beat Hulk Hogan. In real life, and I know I'm probably putting you in a spot here to betray some confidence as a peek behind the curtain, but that's the format of the show. Do you believe the Undertaker had some animosity to Hulk Hogan for a certain period of time? Maybe not today, but once upon a time.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think he did. I think that, in his just to him, this was the biggest moment of his career. And I think that, yes, he did.
So the Undertaker's contention is that Hogan wasn't really hurt and he was quote unquote working and shitting on his big moment. I mean, do you believe that? I
don't think that Hulk was shitting on his moment. I just think that, whatever happened, happened. And again, not being there, I've never talked to Hulk about it. So I don't know.
That's the thing. Like, I don't want to believe that about Hulk because you've talked about this before with other interesting polarizing characters in wrestling. I tend to treat people the way they treat me. And he's always been, and I'm talking about Hulk Hogan, so cool to me. I can't imagine that he would be intentionally shitty to anyone. Right. I understand that in the course of business, sometimes business is business, pal. Goddamn, I get it, whatever. But it doesn't feel like something Hogan would do unless, and we've talked about this before, when Owen Hart kicked Shawn Michaels in the back of the head, Shawn Michaels went to the hospital that night and faked injuries and worked the hospital. And guys at the NWA did that too, where they felt like it was necessary to sort of keep kayfabe. So on the one hand, maybe you think, well, Hogan's just trying to keep kayfabe and really sell the angle that the only way Hulkamania could really get beat is if he legitimately injured him. But really the worst, or maybe one of the two worst things that a wrestler can do is earn a reputation as being dangerous, as someone who's not going to take care of you, someone who will hurt you. And to have a little bit of that stink on the Undertaker character just 1 year in, not good, right?
Yeah, and I don't believe that there was. I really and truly don't believe that anybody thought that he was dangerous in any way, shape, or form.
Did you ever hear, again, nobody told me this, I'm just asking questions to my friend. Did you hear of Vince admonishing the Undertaker after the match? Or, was he cutting a promo on him? Like, how could you? God damn it. You've killed the golden goose or whatever in real life.
No,
a conversation like that happen?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope, not at all. And I think that they watched it, best of my knowledge, that they watched it back and went, okay, let's go find out what happened. But I don't think that anybody thought that Taker was dangerous by any stretch of the imagination.
We should mention that Meltzer was freestyling in the newsletter that Dale Wilkes was probably going to wind up coming here. Do you remember, you were at least friendly with Dale. Do you remember Dale being discussed as a possibility of coming in here? Cause we wouldn't see him here for what, like 6 years?
No, I don't know, because I hadn't even started it. I knew Dell from his Stormtrooper days in AWA when we had reached out to him before, but I hadn't even started in
Global yet, right?
Global yet. So Dell was still doing well in Global, and it was actually, well, that was ugly. It was actually it was this evening in Texas that I got the phone call from Paul Heyman telling me that Eddie Gilbert was taking the book in Global and wanted to bring me in after the first of the year.
Do you immediately run to Vince and say, by the way, I just got an offer to do this. Do you want to hire me now?
No, he had already told me I wasn't coming back.
Okay. Tell the truth. How many of us maybe felt a little miserable after the holiday? Some fireworks went off. We had a few cold ones and maybe you were struggling. Same. Luckily, a game-changing product called Z-Bionics is here to help. You want to enjoy those drinks on vacation without wasting the next day in bed? Well, Z-Bionics is the $9 travel insurance that you'll actually use. Let's face it, after a long night with drinks, I just don't bounce back the next day like I used to. And now I have to make a choice. I can either have a great night or a great next day. That is, until I found Z-Bionics. I absolutely love this product. It's been a game changer in my world and in Bruce's world. You see, Z-Bionics Pre-Alcohol Probiotic is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle the rough mornings after drinking. And here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's that byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your next day. And isn't something we've all heard? Like, it feels like everybody says, oh, you just got to chug a bunch of water. Buddy, that doesn't do it. You see, Z-Biotics produces an enzyme to break down that toxic byproduct, and poof, you feel a lot better. It really is designed to work just like your liver, but in your gut where you really need it the most. So here's the steps. You drink Z-Biotics before drinking, and then of course we want you to drink responsibly, and then enjoy the night with confidence that you're going to feel much different than you imagined the next day. And I have to admit, I was a skeptic about this. We tried it a few years ago. I'll never forget, we were actually on location in Nashville, and both Eric and I maybe had a few too many, but we said, you know what? Let's try Z-Biotics up front. Dude, we were backing at them on the sales floor the next morning like nothing happened. It made such a big difference. I couldn't wait to tell Bruce and everybody else about it. And now our whole team can stay on top of their game, all because we all know about Z-Biotics. I am 100% convinced that this actually works. I want you to try it. Savor the moment. Let Z-Biotics do the rest. Go to zbiotics.com/STWW and you'll get 15% off your first order when you use the code STWW at checkout. Z-Biotics is backed with a 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember, head to zbiotics.com/STWW and use the code STWW at checkout for 15% off. And we thank you, Z-Biotics, for sponsoring today's episode. I'm glad you mentioned Stephanie, because Stephanie went on record as saying that Paul was the first writer that she ever had to suspend without pay, and she says it was because Paul was behaving like a child. What's the backstory on all this? What can you tell us about the suspension?
Well, I don't think he was suspended without pay. Now, she may have said that, but I don't think he was suspended without pay. Okay. Paul had a habit of trying to get young disciples around him. Paul always liked to have a step and fetch it. He liked to have young boys that would do his bidding, go get him his laundry and go get him his Kung Pao chicken, extra pow, easy on the peanuts, make them salted extra chicken, sir. And Paul would just recruit. So anytime that a new writer would come in or a writer's assistant would come in, Paul would take them under his wing. I will show you the way, my good man. And there was one in particular by the name of Dominic, that he was a nice young guy, but a little goofy. But Paul had chosen Dominic as his new disciple, and Paul had gotten up and kind of grandstanded in the writer's room about, this young man is trying hard, and he wants to go out and he wants to prove himself. So I would like for everyone to listen to his ideas with a full heart and give him an opportunity to contribute to this team. So whatever Dominic does, I want everyone to give him his attention and listen. Now, Dominic, you had an idea. Please pitch it to the room. And this was at a time when everybody had kind of started seeing through some of Paul's stuff, and Paul wasn't the most popular guy in the room. And Dominic made a pitch for a women's match in which the women would be stripped down completely naked in the ring. And everybody's like, okay, Dom, then what? What do you do? Well, no, Dominic, what do you do? I mean, they're naked. What? You can't have naked women. Nah, man, they got nip covers. And when he said nip covers, that just, everybody in the room blew a gasket, especially Brian Gewirtz. Well, Heyman took this situation and, of course, blows up and starts cutting a promo on Brian for disrespecting Dominic and disrespecting these young writers who are trying to be a part of this team and trying to pitch ideas, but yet you make fun of them. And Brian fired back on Paul.
And when they did, it was kind of like two umpires, or an umpire and a ball player when they bump chests. And they come across the room at each other and kind of bump chests. And I wasn't really paying attention at this point to the argument because it was silly at best. But when they bumped chests, there was one of the writers in the room, a guy named Pete Doyle, and Pete jumps up and Pete gets in between them and is holding them back and like, hey, calm down, calm down. And I thought it was a pinch fight. It looked like two girls in a pinch fight. So they got separated, and somehow Stephanie found out about it, and they get called into Stephanie's office and reprimanded. And the part that, and they were both suspended, okay? But the part that pissed me off more than anything was I was supposed to go home that day, and I was supposed to go home on like a 3 o'clock flight. And I was told I couldn't go home until Stephanie met with the team. So I had to catch a later flight to have Stephanie come into the room to tell us that Paul and Brian were going to be sent home for 3 weeks and that we were to have no contact with them. And in the all-time classic Michael Hayes line, to this day, the best, and this is partly where we get the doot from, Michael blurts out, but he didn't do it. He did it, pointing at Heyman. He started it, Stephanie. Doot.
My goodness.
And the whole room was like, here, it was like you were in third grade. And he started the fight. So, yeah, they got to go home and they still got paid. I'm sure they still got paid. They got paid and got to go home and didn't have to do shit.
Is this around the same time that the phone call story happens, the conference call story?
The conference call story happened during the suspension time. And Paul was the phone call story, folks, for those of you who don't know what the hell we're talking about. We would have conference calls over the weekend where you would dial into a number and then you had a code, you dial into the code, and everybody gets on a conference call. So when you get on the call, you had to announce your name. So it would say, Bruce has just joined the conference. CONRAD has just joined the conference. Vince has just joined the conference. When you would drop off and you would hang up, it would tell you, Bruce has left the conference. CONRAD has left the conference. So we're having a conference call on this Saturday. This is during time that Paul was suspended from the company. And we used the same conference call number because it was only us that had that number. And we're in the middle of a creative meeting, and all of a sudden we hear a burp. Has left the conference. There was no name. So then it says, roll call. Who's here? Who was that? Who dropped off? Roll call. Everybody, I'm here. Everyone was there. But someone had been on and had left the conference. The other thing about those conference calls is when you dial in, it logs your number, where you're calling from. The call came from a Scarsdale residence that was traced back to last name Heyman.
It was his mom and dad's house.
Correctamundo.
That's amazing.
And Paul denied it. Paul denied it for the longest time. And I just told recently that he was like, yeah, I was on.
What did that sound like when he was denying it?
I was not on the phone, sir. It was not me. But
That's
Paul,
great.
it got traced back to your parents' house. It was not me, sir. But Paul, it went back to your parents' house. Not it.
Well, let's talk about why Paul was removed. Stephanie has said that Paul wasn't effective on the writing team for whatever reason. And I find that hard to believe. But Paul has said that, he wasn't maybe mature enough to be in that environment at the time. I guess, you know, he could be pretty vocal and pretty opinionated and had a hard time, I guess the right word is assimilating. Can you speak to why you think he was removed and why Stephanie would go so far as to say he wasn't effective?
Yeah, because Paul had everybody else doing the work for him. Paul would like shoot out ideas and talk about, you know, the big picture, and then kind of pawn it off to Dave Lagana or Pants or whoever else was working under him at the time, and have them come back with a show. And he would push it off so late. He didn't meet deadlines. He would be late for Vince meetings. It was a combination of things that Paul was almost begging to get off of the team and begging to just be a talent and not have to worry about writing the show from week to week, because writing the show from week to week also came with heat. The boys, if they weren't being used, they're coming back to you and they're saying, hey, why aren't you using me? Why aren't you doing this? So he wasn't being heralded as the genius and the savior at this time, and it just wasn't working. And the rest of the team members were starting to complain, and you could see through it. Stephanie saw through it.
You mentioned Lagana and Pants. Have you already talked about Paul's disciples?
Yes.
And would you list them all? I mean, as being Pants and Lagana and Dominic?
Yeah, those are the three main ones during his tenure that he really tried to bring into the Heyman fold.
Describe exactly what that means in your opinion. How did he get these guys on board? Was he just super complimentary to them? Is this kind of reliving the old ECW pre-pay-per-view speeches that we fans have heard about?
A lot of it like that, yes. But you also have to remember that these guys were coming in as writers' assistants when they first came in. So their job was to do whatever, you know, the writers needed them to do. So Paul would bring them in and, let's go to Chick-fil-A and come with me. I will buy you a chicken sandwich. They made them feel a part of it and would ask them, you know, tell me give me your idea. That is excellent. I am going to use that. You will get full credit, sir. And he was Paul. So, yeah, a lot of the speeches that you've seen on the different things, Paul could be very persuasive and a very charismatic guy.
What would you say was Paul's biggest harm to himself? I mean, did he have one big flaw as the head writer? Was there one single thing, or was it just trying to delegate too much?
Not knowing when to quit, not knowing when to tap out and be able to move on to the next thing. Accept a decision and move on. Like it or don't like it, just be able to accept it and move on and make it the best you can. If Paul didn't like an idea, he wouldn't work hard to make it successful.
This is where Daniel Puder makes a name for himself. Kurt Angle is challenging the finalists to do a squat thrust competition, which you begin in a standing position, then you move into a squat position with your hands on the ground, kick your feet down into a plank position, but you keep your arms extended, and then immediately return to your feet back into the squat position and then stand up. So, you know, they do these drills in wrestling and sometimes even in football. And the winner here is then going to get a shoot match with Kurt Angle. And unfortunately for Chris Naraki, he wins the competition, and Angle pretty much throws him around the ring for about 30 seconds. And I believe even broke one of his ribs in the process. And then he pins him. Before we go on, what are your memories of that? Any heat on Kurt? I mean, obviously accidents happen, but this is interfering with a television show.
No, you know, there was no heat on him. He did what he was supposed to do. The issue was that they wanted to have interaction with the WWE talent. So Paul Heyman wanted to have, and we've talked about this on the Heyman show, but Paul wanted to have Nunzio, okay, who's legit shoot wrestler, very tough kid, but he's smaller. He trained with Billy Robinson, and he is a really tough guy. But he wanted Nunzio to stretch all the guys, and that's how it started out. So from there, it went from Nunzio to Big Show to Mark Henry to Kurt Angle to all these different people. So as we're doing this, I was sitting there and I said, well, what you have to do is I went old school. And this is where I did get involved because I went back to the Gene Anderson and style of training guys. So one thing that Gene used to do was he would make guys run the steps for hours. And he would hit them with broom handles and shit like that. And then once they ran the steps, he would make them do 1,000 squats and go run the steps some more. And then hit the ropes back and forth. And then all this other shit before they ever locked up, before they ever did anything. And then once they were blown so sky high that their legs were spaghetti, then the guy would beat the shit out of them. Okay, so, okay, now let's wrestle. And the wrestler, of course, he would be fresh, ready to go, and he would stretch the guy. The people that came back from that were the ones that really wanted to be in the business. The ones that couldn't handle that, that's how they would weed them out. Not saying that's a good way to do it or not. As a matter of fact, I don't think it's a good way to do it in today's day and age. But for this competition, my idea was, I said, well, we need to run them. We got to blow them up first. So we took them back, and there was a ramp backstage, and we made them run sprints up and down the ramp. Then we made them do these squat thrusts and all this other shit. But we had them sprint forever until they were dragging. Then once they ran the sprints, we took them in and fed them fettuccine Alfredo. So the contest in there was, you got to eat so many bowls of this heavy, creamy fettuccine Alfredo. So now you're stuffing your face with fettuccine Alfredo, and the only thing that they had to drink, they had like 2, not gallons, but the next smaller size of milk that you had to wash it down with. So you had to eat what was in front of you. You had to eat the fettuccine Alfredo, and you had to wash it down with the milk. Now, and one of them may have been buttermilk as well. So now you've been running like crazy. You've eaten all this pasta, drank all this milk. Now let's go run again. You run them some more. We've made them do squats. Now it's time for them to go out and do the competition thing. So now they got to do the squat thrusts and all that other crap. And the idea was to blow them up. Well, watching all this shit, I noticed Daniel Puder, he wasn't sprinting. He was just kind of jogging, and he wasn't going hard at all. Plus, he didn't eat. He wasn't eating his pasta. And I told Johnny, I said, hey, this motherfucker over here, he's not eating, and he's not sprinting. He's conserving his energy. So, they got on him and all this shit, and I don't know that he ate all of everything he was supposed to eat because we had a time constraint, too, that we had to get through, and we had to get these guys done. So they get up there, and the one kid won, and Kurt stretched him. So that all happened before they ever even got to the air. But it wasn't done in a way old school. It was guys were cheating, and they were letting them slide.
Well, after this segment where Kurt's throwing Chris around, he gets on the mic and challenges everybody who's still in the competition on the outside of the ring and says, hey, if anybody wants to challenge me, just step right in. And Puder quickly raises his hand and gets in the ring. You guys knew he had a wrestling background and an MMA background. Are you in the back? Are you in the gorilla position? Do you think, oh shit, this isn't a good idea?
It was a terrible idea. And we told Kurt, you do the one guy and that's it. Nobody else. Okay. And we even showed him, this guy hasn't been running. This guy hasn't been running. This guy didn't eat his pasta. I said, don't fuck with them. I said, leave them alone. I said, if they win and you blow them up in the ring, and said, but you do the one guy and you get out. That's it. Well, Kurt kept going, and Kurt, challenged and made, made the challenge, and this guy sitting there, and Kurt was so mad that somebody would want to face him. And at this time, Kurt has just stretched this big 300-pound guy, which takes a lot out of you. And Kurt wasn't the Kurt Angle from 1996 at this point either. So, yeah, it was Kurt wasn't supposed to ask anybody who else wants me, because then it makes him look like a dumbass if he doesn't take anybody. And then he took the guy, and the guy got him in an arm lock, and then Kurt had to pin him. But it was shitty all the way around. And the point is, we never should have put ourselves in that position.
So let's talk about the actual situation. Angle and Pewter are wrestling for position. Angle takes Pewter down. No surprise there. But in the process, Pewter gets Angle in a Kimura. And while Pewter is on his back holding Kurt's arm in the move, Angle's attempting a pin. And one of the two referees in the ring, Jimmy Corderas, quickly counts 3 to end the match, despite the fact that Pewter's shoulders were not down on the mat, and he bridged up at 2. Now, Wade Keller would put in the torch. From backstage, Gerald Briscoe had the ref through his earpiece count a fast pin, recognizing the situation Angle was in. Angle leaped up, got in Pewter's face, asked him what he was thinking, and then went into a trash-talking spiel that was meant to look like a veteran browbeating a greenhorn, but in reality, Angle was reeling from the realization that he almost got embarrassed in front of a full arena and his colleagues, and everyone sees him as, the creme de la creme. I mean, he's the guy with the real sports credentials. Chat me up here. Do you remember Briscoe giving the order to Corderas to count the pin, recognizing that Angle was in trouble?
Well, here's the whole idea behind it, though. You had an amateur wrestler, and it was amateur rules, and that was what Kurt was out there doing. But you had dumb fuck referees that didn't know what an amateur pin was. An amateur pin is not a 3 count.
Right.
An amateur pin is if both shoulders touch the mat, you're out. That's the pin. It's that quick. So the fact that he bridged out on 3, who the fuck cares? He was pinned. He was down. So he was pinned, and the referee didn't know any better. And I don't think, but at the same time, and I'll defend the referees here, I don't think anybody thought it would get to that point ever. So it just was, it was ill-conceived. It was ill-executed, and Kurt put himself in that position. And the kid had his arm locked in. The kid wanted to break his arm. He could have broken his arm.
I think that's what is sort of lost on everybody. If this was a real MMA fight, Kurt would have already tapped, but he's in this spot where he can't tap. Like that's not what this segment's supposed to be. So he's not going to tap. But as you said, if he really wanted to, he could have cranked that thing, and it wouldn't have been a bad day for Mr. Angle.
Yeah, I think he could. I think he had it locked in pretty good. And again, you would have had to break Kurt Angle's arm before he'd tap. He's just that tough, and he's that good. But why put one of your top guys in that position? And that was my argument. And that was my bitch, that I didn't like putting Kurt in that situation at all.
Angle told people backstage afterwards that his hand went numb after the scrimmage with Chris, and that's why he had a tougher time taking Pewter down. And Keller would write that there wasn't any heat on Pewter for doing what he did, saying that everybody knew he could have injured Angle, but he didn't. And there were a lot of guys in the back, according to Wade, who felt bad for Angle, considering that he was out there in bully mode, but got shown up, numbness or not. Quote, Kurt was working stiff with them, so Pewter went into survival mode, says one WWE insider. That's what he is trained to do and what he should have done. He showed balls and guts, end quote. So chat me up. What's your read on the situation backstage? Pewter comes through the curtain. Kurt comes through the curtain. What are people saying or thinking?
Well, Kurt was pissed off, and I was pissed off at Kurt. I was pissed off at Paul Heyman. I was pissed off at Paul Heyman for getting in Kurt's ear and pumping him up so much that that's what Kurt felt that he needed to do. And it just made it made the business look bad. It made Kurt look bad, and there was no need for it. It was my anger, I guess, is the best way to put it. So I was pissed off at Kurt for letting it go that far. I was pissed off at Heyman for getting him riled up. I was pissed off at Pewter for fucking getting in there. I had a lot of pissed off to go around, but at the end of the day, it was our fault. It was our fault for allowing it to happen. And we should have, going back to Laurinaitis and those guys, man, if you're going to blow them up, blow them up. Don't half-ass do it. And don't come in thinking you forget a shooter, a guy that is trained to beat you and to hurt you. Okay. And that's what Kurt Angle was for so many years. Then we took that away from him, and we taught him how to dance, and we taught him how to work with people and not hurt them. So he's not in that mode. He's not in that killer instinct mode. Now you've got a kid who's coming from the world of shoot and hurt and do what you have to do to win, who they have not taught how to dance yet. And you put those guys together. Yes, Kurt, in my opinion, for many, 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 many years was probably the baddest human being walking the face of the earth. And the toughest son of a bitch I've ever seen. However, at this time, man, he was broken down. He had nagging injuries, and he wasn't that same guy. And to put him in the ring with somebody that was hungry and someone that had been doing nothing but that, it's not fair to Kurt, and it's not fair to us, and it's just wrong, and it was a bad call. So I don't blame Pewter for what he did. Fucking go out there and make a name for yourself, kid. Here's an opportunity. Go make a name for yourself. Why not? That's what he thought he was supposed to do.
Do you think this incident hurt Kurt's rep backstage at all?
No.
Kurt has said that, this is a very awkward situation. His neck is so bad he can't even do 5 push-ups. But one of the ideas was that Vince wanted him to wrestle all of the finalists, and he didn't think he was worried about Pewter at all, but he was more concerned about the 2 big guys. He says at the time he only weighed 207 pounds and his body had started to deteriorate. His neck is just killing him. And he says when he wrestled Chris, that front headlock, he got him in and pushed him over. He jammed his head into the canvas, so his hands go completely numb. And he's just trash talking and opened his mouth and says, who else wants some? And then there you go. That's how this whole Pewter thing came to be. It is interesting because Kurt would write in his book, the whole thing was, it wasn't supposed to be an ultimate fighting contest. It was a wrestling match, but there was supposed to be a submission, but he was a moron. And he put his back on the mat, and it wasn't supposed to be a 3 count. It's supposed to be a 1 count, like in amateur wrestling.
And let me interrupt there. And that was the fail safe on everything, because when we talked to everybody beforehand, it's like, it is amateur rules, because there was no doubt, no matter who it was,
he can take him down.
That Kurt couldn't pin him. No, that Kurt could pin him.
Right.
So that was the fail safe on everything. So that's why, when the referee counted 3, it's like, what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah.
It's a 1 slap and it's out. So we had talked about that, and that was the fail safe, that no matter what happened, everybody felt confident that Kurt could get him on their back and that Kurt could pin him.
I do think it's fun though, that you're fired up at the referees for doing a 3 count, but they're in a professional wrestling ring at a professional wrestling show wearing a professional wrestling outfit where they've been
doing amateur shit.
And you're like, you fucking dumbass, doing exactly what we've sold tickets for and you've done your whole life.
Yeah. Doing a goddamn, hey, we're doing a reality show inside of goddamn entertainment show with an entertainer and a shooter who's real, who goddamn, we want real rules, motherfucker.
What's confusing for you, shooter boy? You know, that's what's fun to me though, is realistically, if he would have done a 1 count, the crowd's going to be like, well, he didn't pin him. That was only 1. Because we as wrestling fans, we're at a pro wrestling show. We've been trained to believe a pin is 3. He kicked out at 1 or whatever. So anyway, it's just
silly.
It's fun to hear you
silly.
get, but my favorite part is you're fired up on it.
I am. I'm fucking hot.
That is so good.
Motherfucker.
I guess we should talk about the end here, but before we do, let's talk about Paul Heyman, because I had never heard the story when you were saying a little earlier about the whole Kurt Angle incident, that it was Paul who was in Kurt's ear getting him fired up. How much blame do you think Heyman had? I mean, had Heyman not gotten in his ear and really firing Kurt Angle up, would he have made the secondary challenge to Pewter? Would any of this have even happened?
Had Kurt not got in,
had
Paul not got in Kurt's ear, Kurt wouldn't have even been out in the ring in the first place.
I see.
So in my opinion, it was Paul who got Kurt fired up to go to Vince to demand to be in that spot and convince Vince that he was the one to be in that spot.
Peter says some of his best memories of OVW are when Paul came down and they got to work together. He said he really likes Paul and he's super blessed to have Paul in his life, even all this time later. Cold turkey can be great on sandwiches, but there is a better way to break your bad habits. We're not talking about some weird mind voodoo from your crazy neighbor or some stories from Marty Jannetty. We're talking about our sponsor, Fume. And they look at the problem in a different way. Not everything in a bad habit is wrong. So instead of a drastic, uncomfortable change, why not just remove the bad from your habit? Well, Fume is an innovative, award-nominated device that does just that. Instead of electronics, Fume is completely natural. Instead of vapor, Fume uses flavored air. And instead of harmful chemicals, Fume uses natural, delicious flavors. You get it. Instead of bad, Fume is good. It's a habit you're free to enjoy. And it makes replacing your bad habit easy. Your Fume comes with adjustable airflow dials, and it's designed with movable parts and magnets for fidgeting, giving your fingers a lot to do, which is helpful for de-stressing or anxiety while you're trying to break that habit. And I have to admit, my wife was a little skeptical of this at first, but buddy, she loved the flavor. Way more flavor than she expected. She really enjoyed the crisp mint, but they've got tons of other flavors too, like white cranberry. They got maple pepper. How about sparkling grapefruit, orange, vanilla, raspberry, lemon? So many different flavors for you to choose from. You'll also notice that it feels great. It's well weighted. It's perfectly balanced. It is fun to fidget with. It's also made of beautiful real wood, and it's a shape that, you just feel cool using it. Here's the reality. Stopping is something we all put off because it's hard. But switching to Fume, man, it's easy, enjoyable, and even fun. Fume has served over 100,000 customers and has thousands of success stories, and there's no reason that can't be you. Join Fume in accelerating humanity's breakup from destructive habits by picking up the Journey Pack today. Head to tryfume.com and use the code WRESTLE to save 10% when you get the Journey Pack today. That's try FUM and use the code WRESTLE to save an additional 10% off your order today. One more time, tryfume.com/wrestle and use the code WRESTLE to save an additional 10% off your order today. There's a now infamous match on Heat from Pittsburgh. Public Enemy gets a win by DQ, but boy, they didn't fucking feel like winners. Tell the story of how in the world we got here and the fallout from this match.
Well, they had a finish for the match where the Acolytes were going to put Public Enemy through a table. Right before they went out to the ring, the Public Enemy were going out to the ring first, and they told Ron and John that hey, we're going to take out that table spot at the end, which was the finish. So they told them that, and then they went out, and John turned around to Ron, and Ron was like, "What'd he say?" And he said, "Take out the table spot at the end." He says, "So they don't want to do the table spot?" I said, I guess not. He goes, "Well, fuck, we'll just bring the tables to them." And they made sure they got the table spot in.
Pretty brutal. when they come back through the curtain, what does Vince or the office or the boys, what's the reaction to the Acolytes and to Public Enemy?
Well, first of all, I was going to see just, who was there when everybody came back. Obviously John and Ron were ready for whatever might happen. And Public Enemy came back and walked right up to them and shook their hands, said, "Thank you very much." They didn't want any more of that. So I think everybody, that just kind of told everybody where they were. And Public Enemy, man, they weren't getting over.
Talk to me about what you just said. That showed everybody where they were.
Well, that they're supposed to be tough guys. They're fine and dandy doing everything in the world to somebody else, but taking it is a different situation. So they were happy giving it out. They didn't want to take it.
Is it not fair to say that on some level, there's like an unspoken pact between wrestlers? And I'm not a fucking wrestler, so I'm speaking way out of turn here, but I've heard that the understanding in this brotherhood of wrestlers is that I'm looking out for your body and trusting you with mine.
Yeah.
And when one of the guys sort of goes into business for himself and beats the fuck out of another guy, that's okay.
Well, when the other guy's not doing what was agreed to do and the other guy is fighting you to get to the point, yeah, it is okay, because at that point, it's not, they weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing. And so they were trying to go into business for themselves, them being Public Enemy, and APA was trying to get to the story that was supposed to be in that match.
Okay. So what's Vince McMahon think about somebody getting the fuck beat out of him on a show like this?
Well, it was, hey, you know what? I mean, I hate to say it, because Johnny, I didn't really know Johnny at all, other than meeting him a few times. So I can't tell you much about Johnny, but Ted Petty, to me, was a stand-up guy, and Ted was I always liked Ted a lot, and I thought that he was always a good stand-up guy. They got in their head that, they couldn't do certain things, didn't want to do it. That was their detriment. So Vince was kind of done with them at that point, and the boys will take care of the boys. And at that time in the business, that's how things happen. You let the dressing room police itself without management having to get involved, and things pretty much usually tend to work out.
Is the business like that anymore?
I don't think so. And I think that that's just, the society is not like it used to be. I remember going to my kid's school one time, meeting with the principal and saying that, what's wrong with the kids today is nobody's been punched in the mouth. And boy, you would have thought that I'd just done something bad to his mother or something. But the society, kids in school, they don't go behind the supermarket and fight. And then once they do, back in the old days, you had a fight with somebody, it was over. You came back to school the next day. The loser had a black eye. The winner was okay. And you moved on. That settled it. Whatever difference you had, whatever bullshit there was, you fought it out. You had a winner, you had a loser, next. And in this society, everybody gets a fucking trophy.
So he's taking some time off, and the next time we see anything about The Undertaker is in the May 30th edition of The Observer. And Smoky Mountain Wrestling, it's written, Brian Lee has changed his hair color and started growing a small beard to get ready for his evil Undertaker role. Brian Lee was backstage preparing for his Undertaker evil twin role. Based on television, it appears he'll be managed by Ted DiBiase. So we're tuning up for the Underfaker here, and he debuts at television tapings on May 24th in Canton, Ohio, and then the following day he's in Erie, Pennsylvania. He does have Ted DiBiase as a heel manager, and he's wrestling as The Undertaker. Meltzer writes, Lee's been made up to look like The Undertaker with his hair dyed reddish and grown long and stringy and wearing makeup, even practicing copying Undertaker's walk. Based on reports we got from the shows, there were definitely some fans, but they were in the minority, who believed that Lee was the original Undertaker. There were loud BS chants in at least one of the cities, which will have to be dubbed over before this airs. Supposedly, most of the fans realize once the match starts, this isn't the original Undertaker. And when he does interviews, it gives it away to all those that were there live. But even so, even with DiBiase, he received a lot more cheers than boos just because of the entrance music. However, we're told on interviews they're going to dub Mark Calloway's voice onto the track, so it creates confusion among the fans. So he will have Calloway's voice on the interviews. When the match is there, supposedly the angle will be something to the effect of the heel announcer will claim it's the real Undertaker, and the face announcer won't be sure. Lee's hair is in front of his face during the entire match, but at the finish, he lifts his hair up for a brief minute with the idea being, if you weren't sure, now you're sure. Naturally, this will lead to the Undertaker confronting him to an Undertaker versus Undertaker match, most likely at SummerSlam. We're told the long-term deal is for Lee to turn on DiBiase and the two Undertakers be together. So there's some rumor and innuendo for you from the Wrestling Observer newsletter, but what say you?
God, I don't even know where to start. The funny thing is that because somebody wrote it down, that it is forever believed as fact. Well, first of all, with Undertaker being out for a while, the discussion becomes, how do we bring Undertaker back? What do we do? Who is the opponent? Who's the right guy for the Undertaker to come back? Now, the natural thing is to do something with Yokozuna, but weren't necessarily really ready for that just yet. And the discussion was, who do we have ready for the Undertaker? And somebody might have made a comment along the lines of, well, it would be nice if we had another Undertaker, type character to face the Undertaker. And Brian Lee and Undertaker were good friends. And I'd recently been around Brian, and people had mistaken Brian for the Undertaker when we were out, because they both had the same hair, they had the same beard. And I started laughing. I said, what if we had the Undertaker? What do you mean? So what if we make another Undertaker? And I got pictures. I had Brian send pictures in and all this stuff, and call Taker. I said, what do you think about this? The idea being that you announce that the Undertaker is returning, and the announcement is made by the guy who originally, financed the Undertaker coming into the WWE, the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase.
Right.
And by God, I'm bringing him back. I've got the Undertaker, and I've bought him. He's bought and paid for. So without the comparison of Mark Calloway standing next to Brian Lee, a lot of people thought that Brian Lee was the Undertaker. So we had a tattoo expert come in, and we had tattoos put on Brian Lee's arm, the exact same tattoos as the Undertaker. As a matter of fact, Jerry Lawler sat at the makeup station with Brian Lee and drew and put color in the tattoos, because we didn't think that the tattoo artists that had put on the temporary tattoos, that they looked good enough. And Lawler sat there and said, I can fix that. And Lawler sat there with a pen and made the tattoos on Brian Lee's arms.
Wow.
And it was, you talk about a great, Jerry Lawler is a magnificent artist, but Lawler did a lot of that work. So the idea was you bring back the Undertaker, and Brian Lee never cut a fucking promo, Dave Meltzer. The voice dub was always the Undertaker in the live houses everywhere. Brian never opened his mouth and cut promos. That was always an Undertaker dub. And that's why I get so upset when I hear that name come out of your mouth, because he gets it from somebody who was there, who sends him a report, and all of a sudden it's fact. But we thought, well, shit, if we could hide it enough, we even talked about doing the matches in like a purple hue so that you could disguise them even more.
Wow.
so that you never really knew. And that when DiBiase came out, man, it was so disguised. You thought, shit, I'm looking at the Undertaker. There was even thought at times about having the Undertaker play the Underfaker. You know what I mean? So you're really confused now. You got Mark Calloway out there who is playing the, yeah. So the problem was that in between our times, Taker had gotten more tattoos, the real Taker. So it's like, shit, we've already debuted this other guy. He's got the one arm, and people hadn't seen the other tattoos.
Nobody thought to call Undertaker and say, don't get any more tattoos.
You know, when Taker got his first tattoo, I told him, dude, you probably just ruined your career right there. Why would you do that? Don't get any, whatever you do, don't get any more tattoos. That was my advice to him in Binghamton, New York. I'll never forget it till he listened to me.
So Bruce is on vacation, and I can only hope that means he's putting some miles on that Peter meat. Thanks to Blue Chew. Let's talk about sex, boys and girls. Remember the days when you were always ready to go? Well, now you can be again thanks to Blue Chew. Blue Chew is a unique online service that delivers the same active ingredients as Viagra, Cialis, and Levitra, but in chewable form and at a fraction of the cost. Take these dudes anytime, day or night. So you can plan ahead or be ready whenever an opportunity arises. Roll Tide. And then the process is simple, y'all. You sign up at BlueChew.com. You consult with one of their licensed medical providers. And once you're approved, you'll receive your prescription within days. And here's the best part. It's all done online. That means no visits to the doctor's office, no awkward conversation, no waiting in line at the pharmacy. Blue Chew's tablets are made in the USA, prepared and shipped directly to your door, all in a discreet package. Blue Chew wants to help you have better sex. Discover your options at BlueChew.com. Chew it and do it. And boy, do we have a special deal for our listeners. Try Blue Chew free when you use our promo code WRESTLE at checkout. Just pay $5 shipping. That's BlueChew.com. The promo code is WRESTLE, and you'll receive your first month free. Visit BlueChew.com for more details and important safety information. And we thank Blue Chew for sponsoring today's podcast. And Bruce's Ding Dong.
But the idea was a few weeks for the Underfaker to be out there.
Hang on, let's circle back. Why did you think he would end his career if he got a tattoo?
Well, because it was a tattoo of himself with the skull and crossbones and everything, and I thought, you know, now you can't do anything else. If this Undertaker thing doesn't work out for you, kid, you're now branded with this fucking tattoo. What are you thinking, you big dumb red-headed son of a bitch? Yeah. Needless to say, he didn't take my advice. And I think, you know what? I'm going to go out on a limb here. I think it's worked out all right for him.
It worked out okay. So
I think it worked out okay.
The plan was to spend a few weeks with Underfaker.
The plan was to spend a few weeks with the Underfaker. And like I said, we even talked about switching him out and actually having the real Undertaker be the Underfaker a few times to really fuck people up. We didn't do that. We just had Brian Lee out there the whole time. But the idea was never to have them fucking be a team and do all that other bullshit after turning babyface on Ted DiBiase. That's just somebody saying. But here's what Meltzer can say after we didn't do that.
Plans
well,
changed.
they changed plans.
Yeah.
No, that was never the plan. But as we got into it, as always, we had Brian Lee come to the studio and get in the ring and work with Undertaker to get his mannerisms down pat as close as we could. And until, for those who know, they knew. For those who didn't, they just weren't sure. And without Undertaker there to compare, I don't think as many people as Dave Meltzer would like to believe were not fooled, if I'm saying that right.
Well, here's the
I think
deal.
more people were fooled than not.
A couple years prior to this, you know, people were saying, oh, that's not the real Ultimate Warrior. He's dead. This
Correct.
is the second one. So, you know,
Right.
It is what it is.
So it is what it is in reverse. But as we got into it and we did the whole build up to find the Undertaker, we brought Paul Bearer back. That was the first time that we wanted to say, hey, that's not the real Undertaker.
Right.
And then the search was on to find the real Undertaker. And this was probably some of this was my absolute greatest experience ever with a celebrity
from outside of the wrestling world to come into our world, and that was working with Leslie Nielsen.
Yeah,
find the Undertaker.
I was going to get there, but let's just talk.
Go for it.
Go ahead.
No, you go with where you're going, and we'll get to it when you're ready.
I want to talk about the decision for it to be Brian Lee. There's lots of rumor and innuendo that he is somehow loosely related to the Undertaker. Just set that record straight.
No, I don't think so at all.
Okay. They did a Superstars taping on June 21st in Pennsylvania. And on the taping, Paul Bearer did an interview saying he's been in contact lately with the Undertaker. On the Raw episode that aired on June 27th, Gorilla Monsoon accidentally refers to Brian Lee as the new Undertaker. And apparently there were already mentions on television of the pizza boxes. Even though the fans aren't supposed to know at this point that there are two of them. How does this happen?
He was a new Undertaker. We had already started Paul Bearer coming out questioning that fact.
But I'm saying at this point,
Monsoon being Monsoon and being a babyface announcer wants to be the first one to tell you it's a new Undertaker.
I get you on that. I guess what I'm saying is they're delivering pizzas by this point with both Undertakers on there advertising SummerSlam, and you haven't even seen the real Undertaker return to confront the new Undertaker on TV. But if you ordered a fucking Works pizza or a Meatza, then you knew the main event.
Yeah.
No problem with that?
What it was. No. He figured that would be minuscule in comparison to the overall scope of things.
Well, he wanted the $250,000.
Damn right.
Okay. King's Court happens on the August 2nd edition of a Superstars taping. And here we have Ted DiBiase and Paul Bearer out, and DiBiase calls his Undertaker out, who then starts choking Paul Bearer. The lights go out, and then they flicker back on. Bearer's outside the ring, and Mark Calloway is inside the ring for the first time since January. And he squashes Quang. So I knew you'd correct that. I know you like that. Then Luger wrestles the evil Undertaker, who sits up after Luger's moves, but finally, when Luger caught him in the torture rack, Bam Bam Bigelow had to interfere for the DQ. The good Undertaker does a walkout, and the two Undertakers do a stare down before the evil one backs out and leaves. And then, of course, the Undertaker we all know and love squashes Bigelow with a choke slam in just 1 minute and 3 seconds. The next week in the Observer, or 2 weeks later, we see Dave Wright. The headline angle, Undertaker versus Undertaker, has gotten so cold that the reports we've gotten are that it will be pronounced dead after the first and only match. From what we can understand and what seems to be confirmed by hints dropped by Vince McMahon on the live Sunday call-in show on the USA Network, which was a major disaster, by the way, are that this angle, talked about 2 months ago as being the resurrection of big box office for the company, is officially being dropped. McMahon said, almost matter-of-factly, that it would be the one and only meeting of the two Undertakers, and after that show, there would be only one. Whether it was the Leslie Nielsen skits, which I thought were entertaining, but I couldn't see it adding any sales, were falling flat, or simply the idea of copying the most over and unique character of the 90s only dilutes the impact of the original, it's pretty well acknowledged that this idea was born dead. From what we've been told, the decision was made to remove Brian Lee from house show bookings for September, and he would return sometime very soon under a new name with a new look and as a new character. So let's talk about how that comes about, because as a kid, every kid I know was into this, Undertaker versus Undertaker. And Undertaker versus Yokozuna had been drawing awesome. Why did this not rub Vince the right way?
I don't think he was totally convinced with Brian's work being that convincing in the ring doing Undertaker. So the thought of, and just for the record, he says that there was never any plans to do more than one. So it's not like, oh my God, he killed it. It was always the plan to do a one-off. This was Undertaker's return. It was a way to bring him back.
and have one match, one attraction, one time.
Well, but Goldberg was brought back for one match, one attraction, one time at Survivor Series, and that went well. So because it went well, they stretched it out. Why?
But it would be different if we were bringing Mark Calloway back as the Undertaker. It was, the whole idea was simply for Undertaker to re-enter and to have a dragon to slay him, and then be on to the next thing. It was simply an attraction, and that's all it ever was meant to be. It was never meant to be anything more beyond SummerSlam.
What type of deal would you guys have negotiated with Brian Lee here? Would it have just been, we're going to bring you in for 3 months? Or
yeah, and if it work out well, then we might have something for you on down the road in a different gimmick, but we'd have to change your look and do something else with you down the road.
Meanwhile, over at WCW, the August 24th Clash of the Champions is Hulk Hogan versus Ric Flair, and it's the highest rated television special on TBS in all of 1994. It gets a 4.5 rating for the first hour, a 7.7 rating for the second hour, and it's the highest rated pro wrestling show on cable since the 1990 Mountain Madness Clash of the Champions, which drew a 5.0. And probably the second most widely viewed pro wrestling match ever, behind Ric Flair and Lex Luger and Sting and Black Scorpion, also in 90. So WCW's business takes a real shot in the arm with this Hogan signing. Meanwhile, SummerSlam is on August 29th, and it's the first ever event at the United Center in Chicago, which Bruce just said was too fucking expensive for the WWF on our WrestleMania 13 episode, if you remember. But the WWF ran the first ever event there and drew a sellout crowd of 23,000 folks. Dave argues that there were reports that it was heavily papered and all over the radio the day of the show, saying that there were free tickets available at different shops. Meltzer does a poll, and everyone agrees the worst match on SummerSlam is Undertaker versus Undertaker. He writes, the WWF's lack of talent depth showed itself once again at SummerSlam. A well-produced show with a phenomenal title match, followed by possibly the worst main event in pay-per-view history. What'd you think of that?
Fuck Dave Meltzer. And first of all, going back to your comment about the United Center, we did run the United Center, and the WrestleMania we were talking about took place after this event.
Correct.
We had run it, and it was way too expensive. We didn't like it, and we liked Rosemont for the ambiance and everything else, and it was a cheaper building to run. But as far, there's a lot of things, and it's real easy to sit behind your computer or your typewriter and judge when you've never taken a bump, you've never been in the ring, and you've never put your own balls on the line to promote something or actually produce something other than, like I said, sit behind your computer screen and sit there and critique and bitch and moan about somebody like Meltzer and these fake news people do. So fuck him and his goddamn opinion, because what they don't know is what did take place behind the scenes, and what they don't know is what we did have planned and what we didn't get to have come across, because the match, like I said, it was designed to be a one-off. It was designed to be a gimmick match. It was designed to simply bring Undertaker back and have him slay a dragon. The match, because Bret Hart and Owen Hart had a cage match earlier in the show that went 20 minutes heavy. So all of a sudden you have a match at the very end of the night with Undertaker and a guy who is nervous as shit, who in his mind is auditioning for a job, in Brian Lee, who has their match now condensed into roughly about 10 or 12 minutes, whatever the hell it was. So much of it was the entrance. So much of it was the pantomime. So much of it was the build that we didn't have time to tell because of things going longer earlier in the show. So, again, it sounds like I'm making excuses, and I am, because that's what happened, and shit happens. So it wasn't great. It wasn't the match of the year. It didn't do 4 stars or 6 stars in the fucking Tokyo Dome. I don't give a fuck. It was an attraction. It was meant to be an attraction. It was meant to be a way to bring Undertaker back and have him slay a dragon on top at a pay-per-view. And didn't accomplish that, didn't deliver. but there were extenuating circumstances that made that happen.
How hot was Undertaker at Brett when he walks through the back and knows that he went 20 minutes long and just slaughtered?
Pretty fucking hot. He was hot.
What's that sound like? Don't do an impression. Just tell me. No,
he was fucking hot. You know what? Nobody was there for the confrontation because no one wanted to be there. But Taker did go and speak to Brett. Just let him know, hey, he wasn't happy with it. I mean, well, I don't know. It wasn't heated. Taker's not that kind of a guy. But he did have a conversation with him that night. And no one was there. So no one was witness. Only people that know what happened in that is Undertaker and Brett.
Meltzer would write, what seemed like a cute idea materialized into watering down the drawing power of the company's top attraction. Another cute idea, like using Leslie Nielsen of the Naked Gun movies, and at this show, his sidekick George Kennedy, in search of the Undertaker, flopped just as bad, as the two were hampered by an incredibly vapid script. As if someone came up with the bones of an idea, but nobody had any of the meat, they did the idea anyway. When it was over, the show, even though it had a few great angles and one excellent match, came off due to the last impression as a lackluster major event. I'm of the opinion that if the Undertaker match had been put on in the third slot on the card, its impact at the end would have been minimal, and fans leaving with a cage match would have left on a much brighter note, and a thumbs-up ratio would have been far better. My only guess is that the Undertaker wouldn't bomb like it did, obviously, and they like to end shows with a babyface conquering all, and the cage match ended with the face getting destroyed at the end. But that mindset ended up leaving a show on a flat note rather than a high note. The natural comparison to the Clash a few days earlier, where the Clash had much more excitement and much more meaning. Ultimately, of course, the Undertaker won after 9 minutes and 10 seconds. Undertaker Mark Calloway won against Undertaker Brett.
Well, Meltzer can take his thumb and shove it up his ass.
In the match, they do a 7-minute ring entrance with Paul Bearer coming out alone, and then the coffin that Calloway was buried in at the Royal Rumble was wheeled out by some hooded men, and inside the casket...
Druids, pal, Druids.
Who played the Druids here? Just...
fuck if I know, just guys.
It was me, Austin. However, that's what I was hoping you'd go for. However, in the casket was a giant urn, and when Bear opened the urn, we got a nice thunder and lightning show. Finally, Calloway showed up. The special effects was good, but it was done the minute the bell rang. One guy in the ultra slow motion has limitations. 2 guys doing it kills the match. It didn't help that Lee seemed lost in the ring, and that the two didn't look enough alike, and the size difference was noticeable. It was as if everyone knew the ending once Calloway showed up. No heat at all. Even McMahon had to acknowledge it, trying to get over the crowd was stunned into silence because there was no tension in the air, so it was just dull silence, not stunned silence. Lee used a chokeslam and a tombstone, but Calloway sat up both times. Calloway reversed the second tombstone, then delivered 2 more across Lee's arms and pinned him. He then rolled him into the casket, thereby killing the gimmick. Word we get is Lee will return with a new look as a biker character with no acknowledgement of this prior role. Leslie Nielsen and George Kennedy ended the show with a skit as weak as the match. -1 star. So, your thoughts on the match, the build-up, and Leslie Nielsen and George Kennedy, which I know you really enjoyed.
The match was horrible. But the match, had its limitations, and they had to chop a whole lot of it out that they had. The match was one of those that had to be laid out and tell a long story, and much longer than what it lasted going out there. And Brian probably was lost because what they had planned and what they had worked out prior to that, they were ad-libbing, and they were just trying to get through it and not have a finish take place as they were off the air. So we had to get the damn thing done. We didn't have a network at that time. We couldn't go over. We had to get done by 10:55 at night. So, yeah, it sucked. It wasn't great. But I'll stand by it. Hey, it was my story. If you don't like it, great. You didn't like it. It's not everybody's cup of tea. It was a story to bring the Undertaker back and to have an Undertaker versus Undertaker, the feeling being that the greatest foe of the Undertaker would be himself, looking at himself in the mirror and having to face the old evil Undertaker. Execution probably could have been better, but then again, that's Monday morning quarterbacking and hindsight being 2020. We had fun with it. We did what we wanted to do, and like I said, it was always intended to be a one-off and a way to bring Undertaker back. The Leslie Nielsen involvement, I thought that those skits leading up to it were some of the best stuff we'd ever done. They were clever. They were well done. They were well written, well produced by David Sahadi, and people to this day still talk about it. And Leslie Nielsen was an absolute pro in every sense of the word, from him being early on set and working with us to him going to the all-nude bar in Bridgeport, Connecticut, where all they wore were knee pads, and just being an all-around great guy. And to tell you what a great guy he was, George Kennedy, who's one of his best friends, we had no deal with George Kennedy. But Leslie Nielsen asked us to use George Kennedy that day because George was in a bad way at that point in his life. And he said, just use him, make him feel loved. He goes, I'd like to have him be a part of this. And Leslie Nielsen offered to pay George out of his pay. And Vince, of course, wouldn't do that. Vince paid George, and all was well. But I just was always impressed by that. And Leslie Nielsen's my favorite celebrity I ever worked with.
Wow, that's quite a statement right there.
Yep. He was great. But it was what it was, and it could have been better, but a lot of things could have been better. And shit happens sometimes.
Starrcast returns to the Chicago area this Labor Day weekend. Tickets for Starrcast VI are now on sale at Starrcast.com and include AEW All-Out Ticket Bundle options. Join us at the Hyatt Regency Schaumburg starting Friday night, September 1st, for unique fan experiences with wrestling legends from yesterday and superstars from today. Follow Starrcast events on Twitter for the latest updates about all things Starrcast. Starrcast 6 is brought to you in part by ProWrestlingCrate.com. Monthly mystery crates for die-hard wrestling fans. Plans start at $9.95 and are the perfect gift for any wrestling fan. Visit ProWrestlingCrate.com today.
Hey guys, need to call a quick timeout here. Wanted to tell your listeners what I've been telling my listeners over at OU didn't know for a while now about all the cool things happening over at adsfreeshows.com.
CONRAD sits down with a pioneer of wrestling television production, director Dan Bynum, who discusses his journey through WCW, ROH, MLW, and where it all began for him, world class.
What really was the thing that catapulted it was, one, working with Ric Flair. He came to the territory and wrestled with the Von Erich boys and gave us so much gravitas. And two, the greatest feud in the history of wrestling, the Freebird Von Erich feud. Mm-hmm. So we were there at the hottest time with the hottest show, and we took over the world.
The Yeti, Ron Reese, sits down with Ad-Free Shows members to talk about his infamous night at Halloween Havoc and how it was received by the boys in the back.
Oh, no, I remember, like, Arn Anderson told me that was the drizzling shits, and Dusty Rhodes was like, that was the worst thing I've ever seen. And I'm just like, hey, thanks.
That's just a small taste of what we got waiting for you. With 4 levels to choose from, see for yourself why Ads-Free Shows is the best value in wrestling today. Sign up now at adsfreeshows.com.